Hey, folks, welcome to Phantoms and Monsters Radio. So, tonight, we're stepping into one of the most disturbing corners of paranormal lore. The claim that certain objects are not merely old, unusual, or emotionally charged, but somehow inhabited, influenced, or used by something unseen. A toy, a chair, a car, a painting, even a board meant for spirit communication. Can become the center of fear when witnesses begin to believe the object is no longer passive, but active. In case after case, the pattern is strangely familiar. The item enters the home or our life. The atmosphere is changing. Sleep is disrupted. People feel watched. Animals react. Objects move. Voices are heard. A fixation begins. The question is always the same. Are these just frightening interpretations layered over coincidence? Or can certain objects truly become vessels, trigger points, or focal anchors for something darker? Tonight, we look at 9 accounts that force that question into the open. Now, the first case begins with something that should have been harmless. A child's gift hung on a wall like any other decoration. But in this home, the object did not remain decorative for long. What followed was fear, nightmares, animal fixation, and a blackout that still defies explanation. So the witness says this story happened to me when I was around 11 and in the early 2000s. My mom's friend gave us a Valentine's Day gift, a wall decoration featuring a clown sitting on a wooden swing. The clown's body was made of cloth and its head was ceramic. Overall, it looked cute, so we didn't mind putting it on the wall. After all, it was a gift and we wouldn't just throw it away. At that point, I wasn't afraid of clowns. Now, our apartment was essentially a single room with a separate kitchen. My parents had just reconciled, so we all slept in one room, which also served as a TV room. The clown hung right above my bed. Things started to get strange right away. I felt as though I was being observed in that room and throughout the entire apartment, which made me uncomfortable. I began having sleeping problems and experiencing frequent nightmares that were often violent. I was not a fan of horror movies and did not consume any scary content. This uncomfortable feeling continued, and one night I woke up and immediately sensed that I was being watched. My dog often slept on my bed, and when I looked at her, she was staring up at the clown. I freaked out. I started to pet her, but she completely ignored me. I poked her, and she showed no reaction, as if she were hypnotized. Now, after a while, she came back to me. I hugged her tightly and couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. Now, I didn't want to talk to my parents about the clown because I thought it was only in my head. So the next morning, I decided I had enough of the clown. Before school, I talked to it, saying that I hated it, and I'd throw it away if it didn't stop bothering me. It felt empowering, even though a part of me laughed at myself for believing in such a nonsense. That day, my mom mentioned she needed to go to the train station to meet her friend who would be staying overnight with us. Now, my dad was on a business trip, so I had to stay home alone after school until about 8 p.m. I was, of course, scared, but everything went well while it was still daylight. I watched cartoons and some teen shows. As the sun started to set, I decided to turn on the light, but the lamp wouldn't work. The switch was dead. I thought, okay, I'll try the corridor light. Again, nothing. My heart raced and I felt paralyzed by fear. I told myself I'd just sit on the sofa, watch TV, and nothing would happen to me. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw one of the clown's legs move slightly and bounce against the wall. I tried to convince myself that it was just imagining things and it was just simply a toy. But what happened next was a complete blackout for me. According to my mom, when she returned home with her friend, they rang the doorbell, but I had already locked the door. I didn't open it. They called on the home phone, and I didn't answer. They went downstairs to ask the concierge if she had seen anything. The dog was barking like crazy, and they could hear it through the two locked doors. There was a light on it in my room, and they could see it from the balcony. This went on for about 30 minutes before they finally called for emergency services to break into the apartment, which took about 10 minutes. I woke up to my dog poking me with her cold nose in the face and hands. All I remember is light everywhere, my dog jumping on me and barking, the phone ringing constantly, and people knocking on the door yelling my name. It was chaos. I was lying on a pillow under the blanket as if I had just gone to sleep. And when I opened the door, my mom and her friend were hysterically crying. They thought I was dead or something. I told them I had been watching TV and must have fallen into a deep sleep, so I didn't hear anything. So after we ate, we got ready for bed around 10 p.m. I slept in bed with my mom and her friend. Now, I didn't mention the clown because I was too stressed about everything else that had happened. The next morning, her friend told us she felt very uncomfortable and couldn't fall asleep because she felt watched. She then pointed at the clown, saying it was creepy. That's when I revealed the last thing I remembered was the clown's leg moving before I passed out. We all got chills. The next morning, I went to school and my mom threw the clown far away from our area. It would have been nice if she had told me beforehand, because when I came home from school and didn't see the toy, I spun around fearing it was lurking behind me with a knife. When I realized it had just gone, I sat near the open front door and waited for the adults to come back from work. That's my story. Other weird things have happened in the apartment as well. Now, not every cursed object case begins with a doll, painting, or relic. Sometimes the object is just ordinary, almost absurdly so, until it begins behaving in a way that nobody can explain. In 1955, one California family found themselves at the center of a national mystery after a garden hose appeared to bury itself alive. Now, this unsolved mystery from 1955 in Downey, California created a national stir. It all began when approximately 18 feet of green plastic garden hose mysteriously disappeared in the ground at Mr. George DePesso's backyard. Scientists from California Institute of Technology arrived to inspect the remaining section of Mr. DePesso's house, as the situation had already baffled both local police and the engineers from the water company. Even an amateur prospector equipped with a Geiger counter was unable to uncover the mystery of where the hose had gone. The DePessos had a restless weekend. "It's horrible," said Mr. DePesso. "We can't get any rest. There was a woman sitting outside most of the night, and every once in a while she'd scream, 'It's wiggling, it's wiggling.' There were people here all night. Once I looked out and saw 14 couples dressed in evening clothes standing on our lawn." Now, Mr. DePesso had to rope off his lawn to protect the flower beds from trampling feet. One enterprising vendor set up a hot dog and coffee stand while extra police were sent to the DePesso home to manage the ever-growing crowd. Now, a neighbor, Mrs. Robert Breeze, reported that her own hose started to disappear into the ground the previous Friday, but her husband cut it off after 15 feet had vanished. Now, as the story goes, they never figure out how the hose managed to bury itself or why they couldn't find it back. They couldn't pull it back up. And Mr. DePesso eventually cut it off at ground level, declaring, "If it wants to sink down and disappear completely, my prayers go with it." However, the burial site continues to attract onlookers for several months. Eventually, Mr. DePesso dug up a 25-foot deep hole and pulled out the remaining length of the hose. "I think I'll just keep it as a pet," he joked. Now, some objects do not stand alone. They emerge from a larger environment already saturated with chaos, fear, addiction, emotional collapse. In this next account, an unwanted doll seemed to become the most visible expression of something deeply wrong inside an already infested house. Now, a witness recalled a deep, unsettling period from adolescence when they lived in an old house saturated with drug activity, emotional instability, and repeated paranormal manifestations. Among a collection of dolls kept in the mother's bedroom, one object in particular stood out. An Ernie doll, reportedly unwanted from the start, was said to speak on its own even long after its batteries had been removed. Now, in the context of the house and the activity centered around the room, the witness came to believe that the doll may have been more than a toy. It may have been a focal point for something darker. Now, according to the witness, their mother collected Elmo dolls, not Ernie dolls. The Ernie doll had been given to her as a gift, and although she didn't want it, she kept it out of politeness. Now, at first glance, that detail may seem trivial. Yet, in many accounts involving alleged haunted or cursed objects, the item in question is often one that was not intentionally sought out, but brought into the home anyway and reluctantly tolerated. Now, at the time, the witness and their siblings had been returned to their mother's custody after a long struggle involving mental illness and drug abuse. The old house where they lived soon became a center of legal activity after the mother's relapse. The witness stated that many dangerous and morally compromised people moved through the home. Yet, strikingly, even some hardened criminals and drug dealers were reportedly terrified what they encountered there, claiming they had seen something in the house that just wasn't human. The dolls were kept in the mother's bedroom, which the witness described as the main hub of the illegal activity. Paranormal experiences occurred throughout the house, but that bedroom and the old bathroom seemed to seem especially active. Of all the dolls in the room, the Ernie doll was the only one said to speak on its own. The witness recalled being in the living room and hearing a doll talking from inside the bedroom closet. More disturbingly still, this allegedly continued even after the batteries removed, long after any normal explanation could have been ruled out. Now, the witness admitted wanting to believe that there was a logical explanation, but said that given the larger context of that house, the repeated incidents felt too coincidental to dismiss. This was not a single strange noise in an otherwise normal home. It was one detail within a larger pattern of persistent anomalous activity. That pattern included reports of ghostly or demonic entities seen by multiple people, particularly near the old bathroom beside the bedroom. The witness also described an incident involving white sage, which would burn in every room in the house except one. In that single room, it would always go out, no matter how many attempts were made. To those who work in cleansing traditions, such behavior is often interpreted as a sign of a concentrated spiritual resistance or entrenched negative energy. The witness further stated that someone in the house became possessed, or at least exhibited behavior that the family interpreted as a possession. Taken together, the house presented a classic profile of infestation with environmental manifestations, oppressive emotional conditions, shadowy apparitions, possibly attachment, and one object that repeatedly behaved in a way that drew attention to itself. Years later, after the mother returned to jail and the family had escaped the house, the witness observed that the next tenants had covered the property with visible religious protection. Crosses, images of Jesus, the Virgin Mary, and saints had reportedly been placed on every wall, along the front door, and near the exterior windows. The witness never asked whether the new tenants had experienced any activity themselves, but the display strongly suggested that they too believed the house required spiritual defense. In retrospect, the witness remains convinced that something oppressive existed in that house and that the Ernie doll may have been one of its most visible expressions. Now, whether the doll was itself possessed, acted as a vessel, or simply became animated within an already charged environment is impossible to determine. But in cases involving cursed or haunted objects, that distraction is often difficult to make. Sometimes the object is the source, sometimes it's just the mouthpiece. Now, few objects carry as much occult fear as the Ouija board. But this early California case suggests something even more dangerous than a spirit message session gone wrong. Here, grief, obsession, and surrender appear to build around the board until an entire household begins to lose its grip on reality. In late 1919, tragedy struck an Italian family living in El Cerrito, California. 18-year-old Jenny Morrow was killed in a brutal hit and run, leaving behind a grieving mother, Mary Morrow, and a devastated sister, Josephine. The driver was never identified. What began as a family's desperate attempt to contact the dead and see justice soon evolved into something far darker, centered on the single object inside the home, a Ouija board. The family had owned the board since at least 1918, but had rarely used it and reportedly placed little faith in it. That changed after Jenny's death. The Ouija board was no longer treated as a harmless amusement. It became an active instrument of communication, a gateway through which the Morrows believed they received messages from the dead, including Jenny herself and Mary Morrow's late husband, Nagaro. In the family's mind, the board had transformed from a parlor object into an empowered vessel. At first, the purpose was simple. They hoped the board would reveal the identity of Jenny's killer. Josephine even brought a string of numbers supposedly received in a dream to local authorities, believing they represented the killer's registration number. But when this lead failed, the family did not step back. They leaned further in. The Ouija board sessions continued, and the messages became increasingly forceful, emotional, and ominous. The family came to believe that the dead were speaking through both dreams and the board itself. Now, this is where the object appears to move beyond a mere tool and into the territory of possible curse or possession. Now, the board did not simply provide comfort, it escalated grief into fixation. It drew in more participants. It began shaping behavior. It started issuing instructions. What had once been a static household item now seemed to exert influence over the people around it. Soon, neighbors and extended family were pulled into the circle. Among them was a 15-year-old Adeline Bettini, who reportedly became convinced that she was clairvoyant, functioning as a trance medium and even being controlled by Jenny Morrow's spirit. Now, according to the account, Jenny's spirit was said to dictate Adeline's actions completely. Another dead woman was also said to exercise power over her. And at that point, the pattern had shifted from seance practice into apparent spirit attachment or full domination. The disturbing detail here is that the board's influence did not stop at communication. It expanded into physical objects. The supposed spirits demanded specific items from Adeline, including a comb set with 6 different colored stones. When that could not be found, a 6-colored corset was purchased instead. The fixation of material objects, clothing, adornments, ritual preparation, and symbolic items is exactly the pattern often reported in alleged haunted or cursed object items or cases. The object at the center, in this case, the Ouija board, appears to create a chain of associated items that also become absorbed in the phenomena. Other objects within the house were then treated as spiritually contaminated. Adeline claimed that evil spirits had entered her clothing. Those clothes were burned along with money and possibly even the Ouija board itself. Hair clippings from the children were cut and burned to drive out evil. Holy water was used to revive one of the girls after repeated physical distress. An expensive dress and possibly a diamond ring were purchased because the spirits supposedly wanted them. The home had become a closed ritual environment in which ordinary items were being reassigned spiritual meaning. At the center of all this stood the Ouija board, still functioning as a command source, oracle, and trigger object. Now, by March 1920, the situation had spiraled. Seances were reportedly taking place around the clock. Children were being deprived of normal rest and care. At least one woman was threatened with bodily harm if she tried to leave. Another family member was told her daughter would be brought in after the board commanded it. A grave-sized hole appeared in or near the yard and was interpreted as spirit activity. The group believed the major spiritual events called the Passion Display would occur, during which the evil in all of them would be cast out. Now, this is where the possibility of a curse becomes especially relevant. A cursed object, a traditional lore, does not merely frighten. It distorts judgment, isolates victims, drives compulsion, and reorganizes the environment around itself. This is precisely what appears to have happened here. The board became an axis around which the house revolved. Human agency weakened. The object's perceived authority increased. People in the house no longer seemed to be using the board. It seemed to be using them. Authorities eventually intervened after neighbors reported bizarre activity and behavior and suspected something was very wrong inside the Moro Sadovini home, later dubbed the House of Mystery. When officers and a Catholic priest gained access, they found the household in a state of extreme nervous strain, hunger, exhaustion, and apparent psychological collapse. Mary Morrow reportedly screamed that her dead husband was present and would kill the officers. Another woman claimed that she had undergone crucifixion and been returned to earth through divine communication. 4 women were later committed after the hearing, judged insane based largely on their own testimony concerning the board and spirits. But the case did not end inside that one house. The same Ouija-centered fear spread outward. A brick was reportedly thrown through a jeweler's window at the board's suggestion. A San Francisco police officer became obsessed with information he had received from the Ouija board, armed himself, vanished, and behaved erratically, and was later hospitalized. Public fear escalated so sharply that some communities discussed banning the board outright. It was denounced from pulpits, lecture halls, newspapers, and even by health officials. The object itself had become a suspected contaminant, a thing that not only reflected instability, but also produced it. That's what makes this case so powerful for any discussion of possessed or cursed objects. Now, the Ouija board in El Cerrito was not described as physically attacking anyone. It did something arguably more insidious. It inserted itself into grief and deepened that grief into dependency. It encouraged ritual behavior, claims of spiritual authority, object fixation, and emotional surrender. It appears to have blurred the line between mourning and mediumship, then between mediumship and obsession, and finally between obsession and total psychic collapse. Whether one interprets the board as an actually possessed object, a cursed item, or a psychological danger focus for suggestive minds, the outcome was the same. Once it took hold, the home changed. The people changed. Everyday items became spiritually charged. Children were pulled into the drama. Reality itself seemed to bend around what the board said next. Even after it was reportedly burned, the board retained its reputation and later inspired a horror film built around the idea that the object had survived and remained dangerous. So the central question remains, was the Ouija board simply a tool onto which grief and fear were projected, or did it become something more, a conduit, a vessel, a cursed object that fed on sorrow and disorder? Whatever the answer in this case, the board did not bring closure. It brought escalation. It brought domination. And for one California household in 1920, it brought the unmistakable impression that something unseen had entered through an object and had taken control. Now, antique objects often come with history, but occasionally witnesses claim they come from something else. Now, in this case, a child's chair purchased at auction allegedly began moving from room to room, appearing in impossible places and eventually vanishing entirely. A woman named Sonia reported a bizarre and unsettling series of events after she and her husband purchased an antique child's chair at an auction in December 2014. According to a dealer friend who attended the same sale, the chair likely dated to the 1850s and was probably made in Georgia. Almost immediately after bringing it home, the couple began experiencing movement and relocation of the object under circumstances they just couldn't explain. Over time, the chair seemed to develop a pattern of appearing where it should not be, vanishing from secure locations, and returning in ways that suggested it was not merely just misplaced, but possibly responding to some unknown force. Sonia said she initially placed the chair in the corner of the living room after the couple returned home from the auction. That same night, while in bed, she and her husband heard dragging sounds in the hallway outside their bedroom door. Her husband cautiously got up to investigate. When he looked into the hall, the antique chair was sitting against the opposite wall upstairs, despite the fact that it had been left downstairs in the living room. And when Sonia approached the chair, she touched it and found it to be ice cold. The couple brought it into the bedroom, but neither could shake the unease of what had happened. Nothing else occurred that night, but the incident marked the beginning of a much longer pattern. The following day, after discussing the event over breakfast, Sonia's husband carried the chair downstairs and placed it in the dining room while they talked. Later, they returned it to its original place in the living room corner. The next morning, however, Sonia discovered the chair was gone again. This time, she found it sitting upright on the kitchen table. Dirt and soil was scattered across both the table and the floor nearby, as if the object had been transported from some other place or handled by something unconcerned about leaving a trace. Now, at that point, her husband decided to remove the chair from the house altogether. He took it to work and left it in his SUV for several days before finally placing it in the far corner of his office. For several weeks, there were no reported activity, suggesting that whatever was happening had either stopped or gone dormant. But that changed one Saturday when the husband returned to the office to retrieve documents. When he entered, the chair was gone. He searched throughout the building but found no sign of it. Only when he began walking back to the parking lot did he see it again. The chair was sitting beside the driver's side door of his vehicle, as though it was somehow moved itself from inside the office to the lot outside. He loaded it in the SUV, brought it home, and placed it in the garage. For nearly 3 months, the chair remained exactly where he had left it. Then, after Sonia decided to bring it back into the house and return it to the living room corner once more, the phenomena resumed. 2 days later, after coming home from shopping, she found that the chair had disappeared again. This time, it did not reappear. And by the time she wrote her account, 3 weeks had passed, and neither she nor her husband had any idea where the chair had gone. They searched everywhere, even checking the auction house in case someone had returned it there. Sonia admitted that by then she no longer wanted the chair back at all. What had begun as a decorative antique had become an ongoing source of anxiety and confusion. If the chair ever reappeared, she intended to get rid of it. The case raised the classic question in haunted object lore. Was the chair itself imbued with some residual from its past, or residue from its past, perhaps linked to a former owner of traumatic event? Or was it acting as a trigger object around which an independent force chose to manifest? Its repeated movement, sudden relocation, icy temperature, and final disappearance all pointed toward an object-centered anomaly rather than a general house haunting. In other words, the activity appeared to follow the chair rather than the location. If I have time at the end of tonight, I'll talk about a case I had involving a chair, very similar. Anyway, some haunted object stories become modern legends, and few have recognized that the Dybbuk box, whether folklore, fabrication, or genuine infestation, the case remains a symbol of the fear that an ordinary container might hold a hostile spiritual presence. Now, one of the most widely known modern haunted object cases is the so-called Dybbuk box, a wine cabinet said to contain a malicious spirit from Jewish folklore. The case gained widespread attention through Jason Haxton's book, The Dybbuk Box, and later inspired a horror film, The Possession. In Jewish tradition, the Dybbuk is generally understood as a restless or wandering soul that clings to a living person, often seeking to resolve unfinished business. Now, unlike Roman Catholic concept of demonic possession, the Dybbuk is usually described as the spirit of a dead human being rather than the devil or the demon. In some traditions, the goal of the ritual intervention is not simply to expel the spirit, but to heal both the afflicted person and the soul itself. What made the Dybbuk box case so unusual was the claim that such a spirit could attach itself not only to a person, but to an inanimate object. That idea does not fit neatly in traditional Jewish teaching, and even some rabbis had described the object-centered version of the story as more of an urban legend than an orthodox belief. Still, the story captured public attention because it combined religious folklore, alleged paranormal activity, and the fear that a simple antique item could carry something so benevolent. Now, the Dybbuk box has since become a modern symbol of the cursed object phenomena. Whether one sees it as folklore, psychological projection, or a genuine case of paranormal infestation, it remains one of the best known examples of an object believed to harbor a hostile spiritual presence. Not all haunted object claims involve objects sitting quietly on a shelf. Sometimes the alleged object is mobile, mechanical, and potentially lethal. In this next account, a 1967 Mustang seemed to become dangerous only on one cemetery road, as though some unseen force was waiting there to take control. Now, a reader recalled a deeply disturbing case involving her brother's 1967 red Mustang, a car she believes may have been haunted or influenced by some unseen force. Purchased in 1981, the vehicle initially seemed fine, but after local roadwork rerouted traffic through a cemetery road lined with retaining walls and disturbed graves, the car began behaving in a terrifying specific way. According to the witness, every time her brother drove the Mustang through that stretch of road, the car seemed to lurch toward the wall as if someone else had taken control. She said it felt like an unseen force was grabbing the wheel and forcing the accelerator down. Her brother had to physically fight the steering to keep from crashing, and on several occasions came within inches of impact. What made the case especially strange was that the car showed no such behavior anywhere else. The family's mechanically skilled older brother repeatedly inspected the vehicle, checking the brakes, steering, and other systems, but found nothing. The Mustang only became dangerous on the cemetery road. Terrified that the car was trying to kill him, her brother eventually stopped driving it and locked it away in storage. Even years later, whenever he tested it on the same road again, the behavior returned. Convinced that something was deeply wrong, he finally arranged to have the Mustang destroyed at a junkyard, even staying to make sure it was crushed and could not ever be driven again. Now, for the witness, the memory never faded. Whenever she hears stories about haunted occurrence to vehicles, she remembers that red Mustang and the fear on her brother's face when he explained why the car had to be destroyed. Now, what happens when a spirit board does not just produce a strange night, but appears to mark the beginning of a lifetime of oppression? This account is especially unsettling because the witness believed the object did not simply summon activity around him, but may have initiated an attachment that followed him for decades. Now, a man from Oklahoma described a long, disturbing chain of events that he believed began after repeated use of a Ouija board, first in a cemetery and later inside the basement room in the family home. Over time, he came to suspect that something far darker than a simple spirit encounter had attached itself to him. What began as curiosity eventually evolved into years of misfortune, paranormal manifestations, addiction, isolation, and the belief that the hostile presence may have entered his life through a cursed or spiritually compromised object. The witness, who identified himself as JP, said he grew up near Eufaula Dam and had what he considered a normal, happy childhood. Nothing in his early life suggested instability or unusual experiences. That changed when he was 16 years old, and along with his best friend Clint, obtained a Ouija board. Late one night, the two decided to use it in a cemetery, a setting many would regard as highly charged and spiritually unsafe. Now, according to JP, the board appeared to respond. During that session, they communicated with an entity claiming to be both his deceased father and a Nazi SS officer. At the time, he dismissed the experience and went on with his life, not realizing that this session may have marked the beginning of something much more serious. Now, after a year later, JP used the same board again, this time with another friend named Chad. The two young men did not know one another socially and attended different schools and had no shared background that might explain, suggest, or coordinate responses. Yet, during that second session, conducted in a fully underground basement room of JP's house, the same entity returned. Once again, the board identified itself as the presence of an SS officer. JP said the spirit seemed calm enough during those early contacts, but he now believes those interactions may have established a foothold. He suspects that the object itself, the Ouija board, may have become contaminated or spiritually charged after the cemetery session, acting less like a harmless game and more like the vessel of a door or a doorway through which something oppressive entered his life. Years later, after leaving the Marines and beginning work in a small town newspaper as a small town newspaper reporter, JP met a woman named Katrina, whom he described as deeply involved in dark occult practices. During that period, he used the Ouija board one final time. This time, the entity returned with a different demeanor. No longer cordial, it allegedly delivered a grim prediction, telling him that he would live a long life filled with strife, depression, and distrust. JP said that in hindsight, this moment feels less like the message and more like a declaration of intent, as though the force behind the board had already embedded itself in his life and now revealing the shape of the curse to come. According to his account, what followed was not sudden destruction, but a slow, deliberate unraveling. He described years of mounting bad luck, worsening life circumstances, failed opportunities, addiction, social collapse, and growing pattern of paranormal activity around him. He claimed that wherever he went, other people also noticed disturbances, including unexplained noises, moving objects, and cold spots. He further stated that these manifestations were not isolated to private moments, but had been witnessed by others in homes, shelters, and volunteer spaces. He also described a strange relationship between his presence and environmental anomalies, including street and power pole lights turning on and off around him on a regular basis. Though he acknowledged how unbelievable this sounds, he insisted that the events were consistent enough to convince even skeptical observers that something abnormal was occurring. Most chilling was his belief that the entity had not merely haunted locations, but had attached itself directly to him. JP did not describe classic demonic possession. Instead, he suggested something more insidious, an oppressive attachment or curse bound to his person and perhaps originally transmitted through the Ouija board itself. In his words, it felt as if an unseen intelligence had remained with him for decades, warping his luck, influencing his mental state, and manifesting around those near him. Now, at the time he wrote the account, JP said he was homeless, isolated, and still experiencing the presence. He added that his nephew would often stare into the corners of rooms and up at the ceiling as if seeing something standing there. Now, JP admitted that he had considered the possibility of mental illness and still did on some days, but remained convinced that the phenomenon was real and external. Now, taken as a whole, this account raises serious questions about the role of objects in cases of paranormal attachment. If JP's interpretation is correct, then the Ouija board was not just a communication tool. It may have functioned as an initiating object in a long-term haunting, curse, or oppression case. The cemetery setting, repeated sessions, and later involvement with someone he had believed practiced dark ritual work may have compounded the original contact. In that sense, the object was not passive. It may have been a mechanism through which the hostile force gained access. Now we close the case lineup with one of the best-known haunted painting reports of the modern era, a work called The Anguished Man. What makes the case especially important is that Sean Robinson, the owner, initially contacted me directly, and the chronology unfolded over multiple updates, giving the story an unusual trackable progression from family legend to escalating claim manifestations. Again, one of the better-known haunted painting cases of the modern internet era began with Sean Robinson of Cumbria, England, initially contacted me about a disturbing portrait known as the Anguished Man. Sean explained that the painting had long been feared within his family and that unusual activity seemed to follow it wherever it was kept. According to Sean, his grandmother had stored the painting in her attic for approximately 25 years because she believed it was evil. She reportedly claimed that she had seen a dark male figure in the house, heard strange noises and crying during the night, and believed that the artist had committed suicide shortly after finishing the work. Family lore further held that the artist had mixed his own blood into the oils used in the paintings. Now, after Sean's grandmother died, the painting came into his family's possession and was placed in the basement. Soon afterward, Sean said that members of the household had began seeing a dark figure of a man and hearing crying, moaning, and unexplained noises. Now, by early June 2010, Sean had already reported the painting was active in his house. At that stage, the family heard strange noises. Several people believed they saw a shadowy or dark male apparition around the house. Sean, who said he had never believed in the supernatural before, told me he had become convinced that something evil was attached to the painting. On December 19, 2010, Sean reported that the disturbances had intensified again after the painting was moved. He stated that the noise had worsened and that he was losing sleep due to the activity. At that point, he said he had become convinced that the events were directly related to the painting. Sean then set up a camera to document what was happening. So on January 9th, 2011, Sean said that while reviewing photographs taken when he was transporting the painting to his car, he noticed something unusual in the image of his sons in the back seat. He questioned whether the anomaly in the photograph might be connected to the same presence believed to inhabit the anguished man. On February 16, 2011, Sean moved the painting to an upstairs bedroom and conducted several overnight recording sessions using a video camera for about 8 hours over 3 consecutive nights. I was part of that, actually. After reviewing the footage, he believed he had captured unusual sounds distinct from ordinary outdoor noise. Around the same time, Sean reported additional incidents at the home. His wife allegedly felt an unseen hand stroke on her hair while she was in the bathroom, and Sean himself described seeing the strange Mr. Fogg-like form on top of the stairs that disappeared almost immediately. After those events, the painting was returned to the cellar. Now, on June 18, 2012, Sean provided another update stating that the phenomena had worsened. He reported hearing crying from the corner of the bedroom and claimed that he and others had seen the dark figure standing in the foot of the bed, apparently watching them. He described the apparition as resembling a middle-aged man, but his features were unclear. Despite his apprehension, Sean said his curiosity as a former skeptic led him to move the painting back into the bedroom to see whether the activity would escalate. Now, taken in sequence, this case follows a recognizable pattern often reported in alleged haunting object cases. Now, the painting was first carried a reputation within the family before Sean inherited it. Once it entered a new household setting, the reported manifestations resumed and then escalated over time. These included shadow figure sightings, unexplained crying and moaning, touch phenomena, mist-like apparitions, sleep disruption, and photographic anomalies. Each time the painting was moved, Sean believed the disturbances changed in intensity, suggesting that the object itself, rather than the location alone, was the focal point of the activity. Now, what makes the Anguished Man especially notable is just not the legend attached to it, but also that Sean Robinson initially reached out to me directly and continued to provide updates as the events unfolded. The case spanned roughly 2 years, but the initial report in June 2010 through the escalation in June 2012. Now, whether one views it as a genuine haunting, a case of suggestion amplified by family lore, or something in between, the chronology of the Robinson reports helped establish the Anguished Man as one of the most discussed haunted painting cases in recent memory. Now, when you step back and look at these accounts together, one thing becomes clear. The fear surrounding cursed or haunted objects is not really about the object alone. It's about what people believe entered into it, attached to it, or awakened through it. In nearly every case, the item becomes more than material. It becomes a focal point for dread, obsession, disruption, and the feeling as something unseen has found a foothold in the physical world. Of course, skepticism has to remain on the table. Suggestion, trauma, folklore, grief, environmental stress, and misinterpretation can all shape how these experiences are perceived. But that does not erase the fact that witnesses across generations continue to describe the same core patterns. The object arrives, the atmosphere changes, the household reacts, and eventually someone decides the item has to go. The real question may not be whether every object is truly haunted, but whether certain objects become powerful enough in human experience to function as if they are. That's where the legend ends and the investigation begins. Now, if you've experienced anything like this or had an explained encounter or sighting, you can send your report to Phantoms and Monsters. And as always, thanks for listening. So, put your questions in all caps and send it, and I'll see what I can answer for you. Yeah, dagnammits, removing stones from the Gettysburg battlefield is said to bring bad luck. I know this firsthand because I had been to the visitor center years ago when these boxes used to come in. They literally were piled up in a back room. And it was bizarre because the notes that people put in those boxes were just ridiculous. I mean, I did an actual video about it about 3 or 4 years ago, but it didn't include stones. All just stones. It was branches, pieces of wood, other things, bric-a-brac they found on the battlefield. That room must have had at least 500 boxes of something in it. And what they did, they took the boxes, they kept them there, they opened them up, but they just closed them back up and never took them out. I don't know if it's still there or not. I have that visitor center has been raised, so I don't know where everything is at. Super chat, Real Truth Ken. What do you think about the documentary showing Patty was faked? I don't believe it, but it shows how much the controllers still want to control our reality with an AI documentary. Well, that really doesn't have much to do with what we're talking about. And I'll probably talk about this at a later date. But from what I have seen, and I've written about this and I've talked about it. I mean, I was on Spaced Out Radio last month and we talked about it extensively. I'm not buying in. I'm not buying into it. I don't believe it. I think Bob Gimlin is too truthful to even be a part of any of that. And I don't think he was hoaxed either. So that's all I got to say about it now. But I don't really believe it. Dagnammit, have you heard of the Busby chair believed to cause the death of anyone who sits in it? Yeah, I've heard of it. I've heard of a lot of different things. A lot of times involving chairs, which I had an experience with a haunting locally, where we had to remove a chair. But that particular case, I don't know a whole lot about it. I have heard of it though. Anything else, folks? Okay, so until next week, I'll probably do another state show next week. We'll see. Send me some suggestions what state you want me to do, and I'll see what I can find. But until then, stay aware, stay safe, and as always, keep looking into the unexplained. Have a nice weekend. Have a great weekend. Have a nice evening. See you next Friday. Good night.